Hey everybody, how's it going? Alright, well, there's a little bit on where I'm at right at the moment. Okay, so the only thing I have left is to jack the transmission up and remove the heater box. And the reason for that is so as I'm pulling the engine out, I don't crash it into the heater box. Now on AC cars, it's just this section right here that comes off. On the heater cars, you take the whole face of the box off. It takes like 5 minutes to pull all the screws and pull it off. And then it's out of the way and you don't have to worry about breaking it. Now, I've also went ahead and pulled out the radiator, and on this particular car, because it has the small heat only radiator, there's a small filler piece that goes in right here in between. And when you're doing an engine swap, you're most definitely going to want to get that out of here. Now, I went ahead and placed it back here. This is what you'll be removing. It's just the 4 screws that hold it in through the front of the core support, and then it slides up out after the radiator's out. Now I've got the shifter pulled out of the transmission itself, and then I have the cable for the clutch out. As far as wiring harness goes, you can pretty much unhook it in the few places that it's connected over here. There's a couple that go into the ignition coil. There's the oil pressure sender, and then there's the starter wires, and then that whole part of the harness will come out of there. And then there's a few over here, and you can pull the little harness over and put it in the corner. And then as far as over here goes, there really wasn't anything to unhook except for the ground that goes between the brace on the body and the bell housing. And obviously the heater hoses needed to come loose. When I'm draining the radiator, I like to start over here at the drain, get it down as far as it'll go with the cap off, and then I'll remove the upper hose. That'll usually let the water level come down enough that you can take the upper hose off, and then that'll allow a little bit of the air to go into the system, which will let more water come out over here. And then it should trickle to a stop, and then when you remove the heater hoses, you'll hear it gurgle like crazy, and then a bunch of water will come out. When it's done, shut your drain, move your bucket to this side, because when you undo the lower radiator hose, it's not going to have all the coolant out of it, because this part sits a little bit lower than the core does. So you'll always have this little puddle of water right here inside the hose. Aside from that, it's ready to come out. I was going to try and pull the exhaust loose, but since we weren't going to use it, I went quick and I went ahead and cut it. Mostly because the bolts that are in it aren't the right size and they're stuck and they're going to break anyway. So I went the quick route. And then under here you have the 2 13mm transmission mount bolts. This will be the same on every single transmission in the Chevettes. The mount is the same for all of them. The cross member just changes and the location of the mount just changes. However, it's the same 15mm bolts that hold the cross member in to the floor. And then of course, again, like I said, the 13mm that hold it on there. And then you also have a reverse light switch that you need to unplug, and you probably should go ahead and drain the transmission, because as soon as the drive shaft comes out, it's going to be a big mess. And then the drive shaft back here, 11mm or 7/16 on those bolts to pull the straps loose and pull the drive shaft out. I am moments away from taking this thing out. Oh, also the speedometer. One last extra thing, so you don't have to test the tensile strength of it. Don't forget to take that out. I took it out with the gear bullet simply because this is stuck, as they usually are. And if you can't get this to turn and come off, here's a 10mm bolt and a little metal tab that locks into that groove. Make sure you put it back in your transmission so you don't lose it. Once that's out, then you can wiggle this out and pull it out, and it'll come out with the gear. So that's where I'm at right now. I have a little bit of moving of stuff here. then I'm going to bring the engine hoist down and pull it. And I'll be right back as soon as I'm done pulling that. Well, not before a small pause, because I just had to rebuild the cylinder on my engine hoist so I could use it. And I've now officially gotten that automatic transmission and short block off the ground 3 times and down with no problems and no more air in the ram. So now I'm going to pull this. Alright, I'm in the final stages of pulling this engine. I got it finally up in the air, and I've got oil draining so I don't make a huge mess. I've got everything unhooked, so I'm not testing the tensile strength of anything. I was even gentle and managed to get it out with the jack under the tail shaft and a little bit of back and forth, and I didn't have to remove the box. However, if you are not versed in removing these engines often, I would highly recommend removing the box. Please do as I say, not as I do. I set a bad example. I've seen so many of these heater boxes get smashed because everybody's like, oh, it's fine, and then the engine rocks back, hits it, and breaks it. So just be mindful. They're not exactly growing on trees these days. So I've got just a little bit more to go, and it's going to be sitting here on the floor. Get right back on it. All right, and it's out. So, a couple things that you want to check for while you have engines out, especially if you're doing engine swaps on these cars, is the frame rails. You want to make sure that they're really solid around the K-member. You also want to make sure that the cross member itself is solid, especially in the upper control arm tube area and where the bolts go through down here and into the outer side of the frame rail. That is paramount, otherwise you're going to have a flexi flyer. And now is the time to repair that if you have any rust in here. This one is fine, however it does have one spot. I poked around on this side and it's fairly solid, although it does have one tiny little spot down there that I'm going to fix. But the driver's side is always a spot that you want to check, and you can see I already put my finger in it. There it is. This is the dreaded repair that everybody starts to throw these cars away for, and there's really no need for it. It is starting to get to be a structural thing, but right now this is very savable. There's a lot of solid metal on the bottom. There's a lot of solid metal on the back. The floor is solid. This is just from road debris getting kicked up, and most likely a small amount of the A-pillar leaking at the seam here, because you can see the seam sealer has cracked and started to fail. But this is what you start to look for. You want to take your finger on cars that you're looking at, especially ones you want to buy. You want to make sure that you can't just stick your finger right through them like this. Now, this looks worse than it really is. This is going to be a matter of pulling this out, chasing it into the corner, and then cleaning all this out. This is just debris. When I'm done, all the debris that built up in here that caused this, you can see there's part of a mouse nest. I'll have out of here. I'll treat the inside of this to neutralize the rust, and then I'll just make a patch panel to go back in here. It'll be like nothing happened. And as solid as the rest of the car is, I'd really hate to see the floor and the rocker panels disappear just simply because this doesn't get taken care of now. So we're going to go ahead and do that now before the car sees the road. I'll have this all taken care of, and I'll do a little video on that, on how to address that and the ins and outs of why this happens on these cars, and ways to prevent it. There's some areas in the rear wheel well too, so we'll cover that at the same time. But for right now, this is just something that you want to take care of. It's something that I noticed right here, right now, so I wanted to point it out. But this is not detrimental, because this is a very solid car otherwise. This is just a lot of debris in here. It's a lot of dirt. There's probably more dirt and debris in here than there is rust. So we'll go over this. We'll gloss over this a little bit more. Like I said, it looks a lot worse than it really is. the rest of the car is great. So the engine and transmission is now out. When I pulled that shifter, this is how I ended up pulling it, and this is the easiest way you probably can pull it. There's a clip that goes around that locks the plastic bits in. When you pull the clip, the whole shifter and the plastic bits and everything, including a spring and a couple cups, come out of there. You want to make sure the plastic bushing and the shifter stays in there. If it doesn't, you want to make sure you know where it goes. And then you just guide this down and out as the engine and transmission's coming out of the tunnel. And it just slides right out of there. So I will get back on this more in the morning. And then we'll start going over the V8 stuff. I got to drag that out and get it all ready. I got to find a little home for this for the time being. And then the fun starts. So I will be back with you guys in just a little bit. One other thing I wanted to address while the engine and transmission is out. This is a great time to do hard lines. And as you can see, the fuel line down here, there are 2 of them. Somebody ran an additional line from the tank up to the front of the car, probably to bypass the old rusty line. So that'll all come out, and I'll reroute a new line following the old stuff and put it back how it was supposed to. And then, of course, the brake lines. This is a great time to address those because you have room. This one has 1 million adapters on it. So I'll be running new lines from the master cylinder to the proportioning valve for the new brake system going in here. And then, because my garage floor slopes to the outside of the driveway, this is a good time to go ahead and power wash this car where it sits. So I'm going to clean up the floor a little bit. And then in the morning, I'm going to get the power washer ready, and then I'm going to give it a good scrub. That way I can go ahead and get motor mounts and all the junk out of here that's down here in the corners, and see if any of the body seams need to be addressed while I'm in here. And then I'm going to start getting the motor mounts ready and start getting this stuff down in here for at least one more test fit before I pull it back out and build the engine. Alright, now this is the new radiator that's going to go in here, and the reason I chose this was a couple reasons. The way the Buick water outlets fall, I can actually run them both to this side. So it worked out really good to go with the Volkswagen Scirocco style radiator. Now obviously this is a fairly thick core radiator. Even though it is small, it does fit exactly inside this core hole. It should be plenty to cool that 215. Especially once I get a shroud and a fan figured out for it, once I get it all down in there. Now, I did test fit this, and while I had to put it in front of the bumper to test fit, it will fit. The ears are going to have to trim to fit down in these corners, and then it'll fit right inside here, which will open up a ton of room right here because that pulls the radiator inside the core support. So I should be able to get away with a mechanical fan, which would be great, because I do not like electric fans. A shroud and a mechanical fan's plenty, and that should be more than enough airflow to keep this thing cool. So we'll address this tomorrow in the morning when I'm not going to be bothering the neighbors out here with power tools cutting on the ears on this. All right, back on it here, and I've got the transmissions up on the table. So what we're going to be working with here are 2 different T5s. What I need to get together right now is enough of this, and I'll explain what I'm doing here in just a second, but enough of this together that I can throw it back in the car on the back of that engine with the new motor mounts so I can do another test fit. So what I'm going to be doing now is we're going to be using the Camaro T5. The Camaro T5, the shifter's back here, and not in a really good location for this particular swap. So we're going to use an S10 T5 as a donor, because that puts the shifter up here, and I think it's 2 inches off where the short tail 4-speed for the Chevette comes in at. Like one's 17 1/4 and the other one's like 19 1/2 or something like that. So it'll go up through the stock factory hole. That's what we're aiming for. But more on that in a little bit. So what I've got to do right now is I got to take the top plate and switch it, because this is the longer one for the longer shifter location. That way I can put this tail shaft on this transmission, so I can bolt it to that bell housing, so I can put that in there with the new motor mounts for the last test bit. Did you get all that? So what I'm getting ready to do right now is clean up the floor. I've got my power washer over here ready to go. And as soon as I've got anything off the floor that might be not water friendly, I'm gonna get in here and I'm gonna power wash scooter, so I can start getting on this. So I'm not gonna lie, I have really always wanted to be able to power wash stuff in my own garage, and I've never been able to do so. It's liberating to know that I can do that now, because not only does my floor stay clean, but this has just become so much nicer to work on, because before you touched stuff in here and you were instantly like greasy black, like it would come off on everything and it didn't matter how much you washed your hands. Now all of the nasties are gone. It's gonna be so much nicer to work on. Alright, well, I've got it together, hovering, about to slide in, so I'm going to go ahead and slide this in, and then we'll get on to the next step, getting everything lined up for the mounts, for their final location, and the transmission cross member. First though, I got to remove this so I'm not crashing into everything on the way in, so we'll get to that. Eventually, this is also going to get cut off on the bottom. It's unneeded. It was a extra brace for the S10. Really don't need to be here, and I feel like it's going to hang lower than the rest of the stuff. So the plan for oil pan is a fun one. I think I addressed this once, but the idea is to take basically the top of this Buick pan and the bottom of a Chevette pan, and then extend the pickup to where it needs to be for the sump on the Chevette pan, and it should clear everything right there just fine and give me just enough oil sump for 4.5 quarts of oil. So alright, I'm gonna stuff it in. Alright, so it's down in there. It's probably where it's going to be happiest. I may pull it forward just a touch. One, because I feel like the cylinder head might actually be touching the firewall right now. This is back a little further than I had initially anticipated this thing sitting, by about 1 inch, I think. But that's okay, because if I pull it forward that far, it'll get away from the brake line and the firewall enough to get a finger in there. It'll get away from the control arm brace down there enough to get a finger in there, which is how I initially planned it. I also will still have around 4 degrees downhill, so the oiling system and carburetor should function normally. The transmission cross member for a 5-speed will line right up and work with a stock Chevette transmission mount if I wanted it to, although I may go a little heavier duty on the mount. And honestly, I think I could probably put the stock 5-speed drive shaft in this car and run it around on the stock rear end for a little while to test it. Another good thing is that lines up dead on with the shifter hole, and I had initially planned for it to be forward about 1 inch, and the shifter itself still would fit through the hole, so no modifications to the tunnel needed. And I still have room to shift the engine forward. One other thing, my thing fell off. One other thing, now that I have it in here about where I want it, I'm going to put the front end back on the engine real quick. I'm going to shove the radiator in here, and I'm going to see if I can get a mechanical fan on it. Now, I have to confirm that the T5 mount doesn't sit just a touch lower. But I've got my drivetrain angle perfect at the moment, and I used a TH180 transmission mount bracket and a stock Chevette mount on a stock Chevette T5 crossmember. Check it out. One T5 crossmember, one stock mount, TH180 crossmember transmission mount bracket. So now I also have a place to mount my exhaust bracket too. And that absolutely is going to be coming off the bottom of this transmission. It'll be the lowest thing under the car. So, once again, General Motors provided. Alright, well, I'm sure you see a significant change since the last time I paused this. We're in the test pit. I've got an air filter worked out. Now there's going to be some modifications to this. I believe what I'm going to end up doing, I think I'm going to take and switch the valve cover side to side. That'll give me my PVC on this side and the back, and then the oil fill will be over here in the back. And then if I need to, I can add a breather to it that will, or I can add a breather cap that has a breather port that I can plumb into the bottom of this. And then what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to try and drop it to about here, just to sink it down a little bit further. And I'm also going to turn it so it's facing this way. And I'm going to take one of the many Chevette air filter housings I have over there and take the snorkel off of it and trade the snorkel, or at least part of the, well, yeah, majority of the snorkel, so I can hook it up. And it'll look completely factory. Radiator things. So, yeah, there's not a lot of room. Buicks have a lot of stick out right here, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, because I'm running the shortest water pump you can possibly get, I'll probably have the pulleys. I mean, everything is as short as it can possibly be. I'm tight in here. So, as you can see, that radiator fits that core hole very well. However, I may do, I typically won't do this, but because I need the room, there's this area right here that runs down, and you can see I can get my finger in between the radiator and there because of the stick off. If I remove that on both sides, that gives me another 1/4 inch or so in the right direction. I may also go just a little bit further so I can sink this back in there a little further. Definitely not going to have a mechanical fan on here, but it'll probably have 2 8-inch Spal fans. Little short deals, real high flow. That way it can cool incoming and outgoing. Then as you can see, the radiator hoses, it's perfect. It comes from the thermostat housing to the top, and it'll go from there to there, to the water pump. This part, the oil filter adapter and oil filter, are going to be right in here somewhere. It's going to be real tight. I may have to space the sway bar down a little bit. I may also have to notch the brace a little bit or change the brace altogether. However, it will all still fit. It's just going to be real tight. Fuel pump. The fuel line has to change anyway, so I'm going to reroute the fuel line so it goes up closer to the block and then comes up, because then it's got to go over into the Chevy entrance. Quadrajet that's on this thing. And then instead of the generator that was on here, obviously, and because we're running Rover heads, I can build brackets off of the bolt accessories the Buick heads didn't have. And that'll allow me to put this small, more modern alternator in here. I'll just have to change the pulley to a V-belt setup. Unless I can find a serpentine pulley that'll fit the crank and also the water pump. I know there's one for the water pump. So that's where we're at right now. I got a bunch of digging to do. I got a bunch of parts to dig through. I have to find the motor mount stuff. So this is a good stopping point for now. Probably here later on in the weekend I'm going to pick back up, and then we'll get back on this. So in the meantime, I will see you guys later. Keep the shiny side up.